Under the Skin has received huge amounts of critical praise and analysis since its release in 2014. Separating the elements of story, plot and narrative, we can see how the film takes a very simple premise and weaves depths and complexity from its play with surface and appearance, as suggested in the title. The story is simple. An alien is sent to search for victims to be lured back to a remote location where they are processed into food. She begins to develop an empathy for her victims that puts her in danger from her own species. The plot involves a lot of driving around, and incrementally we notice evidence of the aliens developing awareness of humanity. This is most clearly indicated through repetition of close shots of her eye, which shifts from incurious and impassive to wide open with perception. As a side note, her male supervisor, the motorcycle man, is evidently looking out for this, suggested by the early scene where the female swaps places with a near-identical other, and in the scene where he is looking for evidence of something in a close scrutiny of the female's face. Evidently, within the alien hierarchy, he has a greater sense of awareness than she does. Narratively, though, the film is rich and complex. There is no use of exposition. Dialogue is often half-heard and of negligible importance. Much of it was unscripted improvisations between Scarlett Johansson's female and a series of unsuspecting men with whom she strikes up conversations, having no idea that they were being filmed until their permission was asked afterwards. Johansson's performance is outstanding as she shifts between the flirtatious chat that we come to realise is a mask that is quickly dropped when not required, and the emotional detachment of the alien's true nature. That she takes such an unsympathetic character and gradually imbues her with growing curiosity and developing empathy is skillful. The cinematography and editing work with subtlety to develop the narrative, and from the start demand patience and attention from the viewer. Note the opening shot of very long duration on an initially blank screen that gradually reveals a pinprick of light. Long shot duration allows us to look more closely to see what we are looking at when the subject of the shot may not initially be clear. These often static shots ask the spectator to engage in intense focus on letting details sink in. Hidden cameras in the van scenes and often long-distance shooting of unconventional framing align the spectator with the female's initially detached perspective. The street scenes are mostly shot from within the van, which separates her from the outside world. As the narrative unfolds, there is a gradual shift in cinematography towards greater observation of physically closer detail to imply the female's growing perception. The final victim's hands, the cake the alien attempts to eat, or the television she seems to find baffling. The understated moment of the female's epiphany is a 50-second long medium shot of her looking at herself in a mirror before a cut to a fly trapped behind a glass pane. Contrast this to the panic in the forest chase, where the short shot duration in the editing reflects the female's emotional state, or the overload montage where she starts to take in information about the people she has been hunting. The female notably leaves the removed space of her van behind in another single long static shot at the start of the film's third act. This is typical of the striking contrast in mise-en-scène which set up binary opposites. Alien environments are stark black or sterile white, shot with high contrast lighting, shiny, empty and featureless. On the other hand, there are multiple shots of the wild, natural Scottish countryside, or the streets of Glasgow, low contrast lighting, urban, busy. These urban scenes also contrast with the natural world of the earth, the seashore, the foggy moor, the forest, all wild and alive, all familiar and unfamiliar. In the first scene where we see the female, she removes the clothes of a near-identical predecessor, an emotionless violation of another's body in a blank, sterile environment. Contrast this with the final sequence where the female is assaulted in the forest, a scene full of fear in a cold, natural environment. The liminal space between alien and human comes in the derelict houses where the female takes her victims. Mildewed and shot in low contrast light, she leads them into a blank, reflective alien environment. During the motorcycle man's inspection of her eyes, note that the mise-en-scène seems to be halfway between alien and human. In considering costume, hair and makeup, the female notably adopts an image of feminine that is never changed. Presumably she doesn't sweat or need to change clothes. By the final sequence, she is notably torn and dirty, reflecting her character growth. Meanwhile, the motorcycle man looks similarly alien and yet familiar in his leathers and helmet. There is also at times a high contrast between quiet, diegetic sound and loud sounds. Near silence is very uncomfortable at points and builds the film's unhurried pace. Dialogue is often muffled. The female's voice is first heard over the ambiguous opening images as expressionless, learning phonetic speech. There was also a contrast in accents. Johansen adopts an English RP accent, a manner of speaking that is learned as an artificial standard, and this contrasts with the Glaswegian accents of the men she engages with. Music is atonal, unmelodic, unnerving, alien. A recurring motif is played when the female seduces or hunts and is a swooping, woozy piece with a slow, strong rhythm. The motorcycle man's theme is a buzzing insect sound of multiple stringed instruments that suggests a swarm or hive-like hierarchy of the aliens. The hunting theme and the hive sound in the two aliens' main scene together blends the two pieces of music, perhaps suggesting communication. Over the montage where the female is flooded with images of day-to-day human life, the soundtrack signals her vital shift in awareness as the insect-like sound of the string instruments tentatively find chord changes and a melody begins to form. It is as if the chaos is beginning to make sense. So, this is a science fiction film that doesn't reveal itself as such for most of the duration. It is also a film of horror tropes, yet it is not quite a horror. It is a film that requires patience and observation, and applying different critical ideological frameworks can be useful. First, to take a broad Marxist feminist critical approach, we can identify that the female is clearly a low part of a class and/or gender hierarchy. From the evidence that we are given, the Johansen character and the other female she replaces, and the group of what appear to be males riding motorcycles, there is a division among the aliens along gender lines. Initially lacking consciousness, the female's function is to serve the means of production, meat or commerce, sex or bodies. Thus there is a clear hierarchy, with class consciousness evidently greater in the motorcycle man, who acts as the film's authority figure. Developing consciousness, or empathy for the victims, leads to redundancy for the function the female has to perform, and she will need to be replaced. This is hinted at in the early scene where she replaces the other female, who sheds a single tear. The motorcycle man is clearly looking for signs that this is going to happen at the midpoint of the narrative. Dawning consciousness puts the female in peril under this oppressive class system, and her growing self-awareness leads her to reject the hierarchy and attempt to flee. Her attempts to escape will be brutally suppressed. That her oppressor is a human rapist who would previously have been one of her victims is narratively ironic if problematic. The female's only escape from the tyranny of the patriarchal power structure is in death. Second, we can use Barbara Creed's concept of the monstrous feminine. In this major work, Creed argues that when horror films employ a female antagonist, she is defined through a perversion of the female reproductive bodily functions, a horror that arises from male concerns regarding female sexual difference and castration anxiety. The horror narrative typically sees the monster vanquished and order is restored. In short, female biological details are exaggerated as monstrous and women's bodies become a battleground in which patriarchal dominance is frequently reasserted. The most typically horrific aspect of the monstrous feminine is the femme castratrice, the castrating woman. Consider the sequence of the seduced men drawn into the alien, womb-like environment, where their arousal leads to their entire body deflated, flaccid, floating around in an amniotic fluid, shrinking before being processed through a tunnel, as if a perverse reversal of birth. The dark room where the male victims are pulled into the liquid is the film's most memorable set, embodying Creed's definition of the monstrous womb. Creed links all the viscera associated with the monstrous to the concept of abjection. The term has been defined as that which fundamentally disturbs conventional identity and cultural concepts. Julia Kristeva describes abjection as subjective horror, the feeling when an individual experiences or is confronted by typically repressed corporeal reality. Distortions of desire and the body produce repulsion in the spectator. The abject self is the self we partially recognize, partially consider other. The parts that eject body fluids behaves in base ways, is uncivilized and thus monstrous. Creed identifies tropes of horror films as based on male fear of the abject, typically defined in one of a series of monstrous female archetypes, several of which can be linked to the female in Under the Skin. Vampire, in that she seduces in order to drain body fluids, witch, she is burned for her transgressive nature, and castrator. Under the Skin is not a genre horror film. The female is simultaneously the seducer and innocent, predator and victim. Her character arc takes her from a sterile environment to earthly, natural and feral. The mise-en-scène includes many qualities that we would consider abject: an ant shot in gigantic close-up, choking on and spitting out cake, abandoning a baby on a stormy beach, facial deformity. The female increasingly becomes self-aware, discovering her own body and gynecology. In confronting her abject self, the female becomes cast off and separated from her alien society, but cannot be accepted by the human world that only sees her as a potential for sex. Her attempt at independence becomes abject to the males that rely on or desire her body. A negative reading of the film might argue that its message is that the transgressive female must be punished, or we must not suffer a witch to live. That would position us alongside the rapist, which few spectators would accept. However, the film's narrative is structured around the female's character arc, her growing realization, her perspective. The abject female may be vanquished by patriarchy, but our sympathies have grown with her. As spectators, we are positioned in alignment with her, and this is why Under the Skin is not a true horror film. It is a tragedy.